Welcome to Do Beautiful Things. I'm your host, Jenny Lawson, President and CEO of Keep America Beautiful. On this podcast, we explore all the ways, big or small, that people are stepping up to end litter, rethink recycling, and create cleaner, greener, and more beautiful communities. You'll hear from change makers, industry experts, community leaders, and everyday doers who are showing that when we unite to care for the places we love, we can make a real difference for each other and for the planet we share. So let's get inspired, let's get connected, and let's do beautiful things. Welcome back to Do Beautiful Things. Today, we're continuing our special series on the 2026 Keep America Beautiful National Litter Study. We've already covered the hard data with David Scott and the methodology of counting 35 billion pieces of trash with Veronica from HDR. But today, we're talking about people. Get this, 94% of Americans agree that litter is a problem, yet it still plagues our streets, our rivers, and our beaches. Why is there such a massive disconnect between how people view the problem and what the numbers tell us? Our guest today is going to help us figure this out. Joining us today is Wendy Salomon, Managing Director at the Harris Poll, where she leads the reputation and corporate strategy practice. The Harris Poll partnered with us on this groundbreaking research to find out exactly how Americans feel about litter. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Wendy, you've been a guest on the show before, but for all our listeners, let's start with you sharing a little bit about yourself and your role at the Harris Poll.
Sure. So I lead up the corporate strategy and reputation part of the Harris Poll. So we sort of focus at Harris on brand and reputation and, of course, thought leadership. And I mean, more and more organizations are looking for data-driven platforms, right, to build their reputation, to help them engage in a way that is agnostic and on issues that matter to them. And basically, the work that we're talking about today is actually squarely in what I would say is really unique about Harris, which is, and I've been sort of analyzing this for 30 years or so, but I think what sets us apart is absolutely our curiosity, right? And as we talk about people, I loved your intro. We are absolutely committed to understanding what the backdrop of the cultural backdrop is, right? Like to your efforts, to any company's efforts, that helps them understand, why do Americans feel the way they feel? Why are they behaving in some ways and on board with some things and not others, right? And so certainly our partnership that we're going to talk about today on this public attitudes piece of the pie is squarely fits in this thought leadership space, this curiosity that Harris has, and really sort of threading the needle between that cultural context and the issues that matter.
Thank you. And that's why we are delighted to partner with you on this. And I think that, what we know is that litter, the behavior of littering is a behavior element to it, right? It's how people think and act and respond to their environment is clearly a part of what drives litter and littering numbers. There's infrastructure, there's all sorts of other things. So it's not an exclusive, but so understanding what motivates people, how they see the problem, and what's ahead is a really important part of this. So maybe we step back and just start with the headlines, right? What are the major headlines and key takeaways from the study on how Americans are viewing litter today?
I mean, I think the most important one, and this is literally like stepping back further, maybe even in the question is implying, but like, I think what this study is pointing to is that even against the maelstrom of today, right? And I think we can talk more about that, right? But the main finding unequivocally says that the work that Keep America Beautiful is doing is important, right? The idea of how topical litter is, more topical than I was expecting. The idea to which the American public says, this isn't just something we're talking about, but like this is something that has an appreciable impact on my quality of life, right? So community beautification is absolutely socially relevant, part of the conversation. And even so, a little more so for younger Americans, which I think is really important to the story. And people believe it's a major problem. So in truth, they feel like it's not getting any better. And I think we're going to unpack that a little bit too, right? Because your physical study proved a little bit of a different story. But the idea that there's something that is so culturally relevant and that is seen as something that actually can impact, our comfort, our security, our housing values, right? There's unanimous, absolutely non-politically polarized agreement about the negative impacts. And so I think it really just double underscores the work you're doing. And there's a certain meeting of the moment, I think.
We're excited to see where that goes, actually, right? How do we meet the moment, and how do we understand, that idea that, people don't see the change? How do you help them,
Yeah.
I think, embrace that change is actually possible, which I think, is a challenge for this moment, right? I think folks are so stuck in the nothing's ever going to get fixed around here mindset, that the idea that things can get better and we actually have a solution that's starting to work and has been working is, I think, an exciting place to explore with people and how they think about litter. So in that sort of disconnected space, there's a fascinating disconnect in the data, right? 94% of Americans see litter as a national issue, but it drops to 76% of Americans see it as an issue when they're looking in their own communities.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
It's interesting because we all sort of came of age with the whole grass is always greener, right? Like we're always sort of thinking it's better somewhere else, but you're absolutely right. In this instance, when we are in, like, when we're asked to evaluate that familiar space that is our community. Now, granted, still 76% still say it's a problem, right? So, but it's far less than we see it at the national level. But we see that we see it as worse outside our own communities. And so now, when we say think about America, that's a more generalized understanding. It's more abstract, right? It's more like what the news tells us, what media tells us, what, maybe some trips we've taken along highways, waterways, beaches, cities, et cetera, right? So we know that our assessment of America is more wake us up in the middle of the night. And what are we going to say about that? Whereas our assessment of our communities is far more, I think, grounded in that familiarity. So there is something about local but honestly, Jenny, I think this is also part of a broader trend we're seeing at Harris where, like, we know that things that are more community, like the more local something is, the more sheltered they are from some of the concerns and the vitriol we see sort of across our nation more broadly. Like, so we don't trust the media, but our local news guy, just we love him to death, right? Like, we don't like the financial institution, but Joe and Jane and our financial advisors, like, we think they're just fabulous, right? So I think the same pattern applies here. There is something, that intimacy with this place where we live, where we know our neighbors, and it's the streets that we travel on. It brings regarding our communities that helps us be slightly more optimistic, which we could use. I mean, as you said.
Well, right. And we've got those statistics too, right? This idea that addressing litter in community, even you don't see it as 95% of people seeing it as a problem, 76 still do, and that still really matters. And addressing it is refreshing and encouraging to people, right? It is a happy solution that people can feel pride and ownership of to some extent. It's interesting, as you were talking, the idea that 94% of Americans see litter as a national issue seems to me that on some level it's what the news is showing and telling you, whereas the 76% who thinks their own community has a problem, but maybe not as many as the other, is a little bit what you see with your own eyes, what your experience.
It's what you experience when you drop your kid off at school. Yeah,
Right.
totally.
Going a little deeper, 55% of people feel local litter hasn't changed at all in 5 years, but the data shows a different story, right? A pretty significant drop in roadway and waterway litter nationwide. Again, is that sort of what you see in your own space versus the national narrative?
I think it's a little bit of that, and it's also a little bit of the moment that we're in. So first of all, before I answer this question, I need to give a huge, it's an analytical gift that you have created, this physical, measured, scientific view of litter, plus the perceptual polling human element. Like, how cool that we can look at those two things together, right? That your audit has actually allowed us to have that advantage. So when we think about the perception piece, when we think about, what does America think? overall, separate from litter, if you did a quick tally of negative versus positive news these days, my guess is that we would find that we're all very accustomed to negative news, right? We've been living in a time of stacked crisis, be it economic, be it geopolitical, be it like, yes, we're worried about climate. AI's looming threats. Yes, we're worried about how divided we are. Like, I mean, we are not lacking for challenging situations. And so my sense is that this literally has created a barrier to even the willingness to believe that signs of optimism are real. I really truly believe that. So there's like this negativity bias that litter that we see, we sort of inflate it, we think it's more. We don't remember, our perceptions are based on these general feelings that like sort of the news coverage, not necessarily other things. I mean, and I say this because a few months ago, perhaps you remember, there was a moment when we've been in this long inflation arc, but there was, inflation was going down, unemployment data was heading in the right direction, like that proverbial cost of a dozen eggs, right, was leveling off, the old cost of the grocery cart story. Stock market was delivering rewards for those who were participating in it. And so all of the economic metrics were actually, and again, I would equate that to your physical hard facts, right? Corollary. They were all trending positively. And we did a study of Main Street America, right? This is Applebee's America. This is not elites, just average Americans. And in every single case, when we ask, what's the unemployment rate doing? What's the stock market doing? What's the cost of groceries doing? How's inflation? They said it is moving in a negative direction. And in every single case, they were wrong, right? So we have this sense of we haven't worked our optimism muscle in a really, really long time, right? And so there are times, and this just appears to be one, we're just not that open to good news. And we know that, as I think about this, what I think would be interesting, and it's nothing I have an answer for, it's more of just a curiosity, is like, we know that literally the cost of eggs, the price of gas are like the trigger costs, right? That for Americans indicate a whole host of other things. Whether or not I'm optimistic about them depends on the price of gas, right? So what is the litter trigger thing, right? What would be the thing that if the public saw, they would believe the good news? Like, I just wonder if there's something like that. Is it about, vacant lots? Is it about playgrounds, right? Because we sort of know from our data where people think litter tends to congregate and build up. But I think that's sort of an interesting question. But I think to the question, like, we're not in a moment where we're open to good news. And you have good news to tell.
We do have good news to tell. I mean, a 34% reduction in litter is pretty remarkable. I mean, I'm starting to wonder, is there a vision that, right? So if litter is down 34% in the last 5 years, right? And it's still only 100% some game, right? Can we, in the next tranche of 10 years, get it down another 34% and another 34% in the 10 years after that? And all of a sudden we have ostensibly managed litter in America, right? Like, it seems so within reach to be able to envision that. But that's going to require people, right, getting involved. And the data shows Americans, 90% overwhelmingly feel a personal responsibility to help reduce litter, right? So they do take a personal pride in all of that. Yet many of them, 74%, admit to having littered at some point, right? And we all do, right? Like, I have dropped a doggy bag out of my pocket at some point in my life, or a gum wrapper, right? It's human nature. I think Sasaki, the CEO at TerraCycle, was on a panel with me, and he said, litter is how we learned about history, right? Is studying people's litter patterns.
Litter is archaeology,
right? It's the ancient. It's part of the human experience. It's how you manage it and what you do with it that needs to really change. So 90% of people overwhelming feeling this personal responsibility. 74% admitted to having littered at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that?
How do you thread that needle?
Yeah. What is that behavior all about?
Yeah. So I do think that the 74% is one of the more interesting data points, right? That 3/4 of Americans admitted to having littered in the last year, right? And it's hard to justify because what we talked about earlier, it's an important issue. It's not benign. It's not just a topical issue. It's not just an issue that people talk about that is sort of inconsequential. More than 90% of Americans, which is like, this is universal. This is like, it would be hard to find somebody who didn't think that litter negatively impacts safety, comfort, quality of life, economic tourism, right? All that stuff. And so at the end of the day, I think how we think about this is sort of twofold. So we all rationalize that a little littering doesn't matter. If everything I litter over the course of the whole year doesn't even fill my one pocket, I mean, come on, how bad could it be? Right. And there's of only among those 74% who say they litter, a very, very small portion are what we would call back in the day litter bugs. Right. For most, it's a very infrequent thing. Right. And so for this every once in a while offender, right, I think that there's just a sense of how bad could that be. Like, we see similar behavior even with recycling and some of the polling that we've done for you and some of the attitudes that we've measured, where it's like, this may or may not be recyclable, but like, how bad could this one thing be in the overall stream? I mean, come on, I'm still overall doing the right thing. So obviously, when you talk about like, what can we do to make it even have people make it harder to litter than to not litter, right? Like, I mean, they talk a lot about convenience and where trash cans are and how many steps you have to take and all the things. So we know that there are some things that could be done, but I also think that part of it here is not just this almost cavalier relationship we have with small form, infrequent dropping things on the ground. I think that in America, we talk a lot for the past 5 years or so about behaviors that are being normalized, right? Like, you would see somebody regularly doing something that had prior, like you would have thought is a pretty sketchy thing to do. But when you see it enough, right, it slowly becomes a behavior that all of a sudden is in those basket of things that it's kind of okay to do, right? Like, we do this here now, right? And so one thing I thought was really interesting in this work was that we found that 68% of Americans had seen someone litter, right? So when you think about that normalization, when you think about what it means to walk down a city street and some of the common things you see litter is kind of a common thing, right? So can it be that it's actually increasingly sensible to think about modest littering in the pantheon of acceptable behavior? So, I mean, I don't know if that's true, but you definitely see something. There is a correlation between that kind of seeing and that commonality, that normalization of litter. And so, like, the Pollyanna in me would be like, well, what other behaviors can we normalize? Right? Like, can we normalize the fact that, like, let's take 5 more steps and walk to the trash can? Let's gather with our neighbors to make a difference. So I think it's really, I thought the normalization, the idea that this is just what we do here, to me feels like something to get underneath.
Yes, and we know from the sort of litter on this, so not the human behavior side directly, but if there's a park with an overflowing trash can and nobody picks it up, there's likely more litter that's going to collect around there than not, right? Like, if parks are not cared for and well tended, they tend to collect more litter than parks that are. So that people see normalized behavior of, oh, they don't pick up litter on this street, so who cares if I drop it, to
Especially if I drop it near the trash can. I mean, that's kind of okay.
kind of okay, right?
Yeah.
Sure. And so it's just very interesting, right? Like, so it's really important, even more important than that the trash cans, right? So what does the community do? What does the individual do, right? So community needs to make sure those trash cans are emptied on a regular basis so that people understand that the behavior of littering, that their peers are not doing it in this town. You don't litter in this town. And that message gets across in the same way. So the role of communities to keep infrastructure going, to be regular in their trash cleanup and all of those things, so that you are modeling even at the municipal level the cultural norm that you want to establish, right? So let's talk about the role of corporate responsibility. We heard people say that it's the responsibility of the company to clean up the litter of their products. What did the public attitudes survey say about how Americans view that topic?
I think actually that it was really interesting. So first of all, when we say who's responsible, the greatest enthusiasm, 73% of Americans say, like, by the way, whoever made the mess needs to pick it up, right? So that would hold whether you're an individual, whether you're a corporation. So to the question, where is litter pickup responsibility? It's squarely placed on the entity that littered in the first place. So certainly Americans who hear of a company littering would fully expect that same company to handle that remediation. So um, that is sort of goes without saying. But I think what I want to do is sort of spin the lens of the role that this could play, our relationship with business, our being Americans, relationship with business sort of ebbs and flows, right? Sometimes large and small companies can do no wrong, usually. Very often they can do plenty of wrong, particularly large companies, right? So we sort of have these different reputational relationships with companies. We're at a moment right now where if you asked Americans, do companies understand the issues that matter to you? Like, are they sort of in step with you? Do they understand the daily lives of people? Are they focused on the things that are important to you? You've got around, depending on how you ask the question, around 60 or so percent of Americans that say, no, they're not, right? Like, so the majority of Americans right now feel that companies are out of step. And when we look at what is in their quiver to be seen as more in step, right? I sort of would posit that this type of litter pickup, now, of course, if they're the responsible party, that's sort of a non-negotiable, but even otherwise, how can companies engage in your mission, right? In the idea of a cleaner and greener America? For me, it feels like there's a moment right now where this would be good on so many levels, right? Because it is such an important issue. Now, but when we think about individual responsibility, there is a clear civic thread. Like, so we say, like, 73% say, whoever made the mess cleans it up, company or person or whatever, but nearly as many say it is everybody's responsibility. Everybody should play a role. So for me, that is a really civic thread through the data,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, what does it mean that this is seen as a shared responsibility for everyone? 90% of Americans say it's my personal responsibility to reduce litter. So there is a sense of this like universal stewardship that we all should feel a responsibility for, which I think is a really interesting idea. Like if you like, but earlier I was talking about how the idea of America sometimes is so it's sort of unrelatable. It's so big. It's based upon generic assumptions, but what we're saying in this whole line of questioning that the data uncovered in terms of Americans' attitudes is that, like, actually this is super personal. Like, everybody has a role. We should all be seeing ourselves as a steward for this nation when it comes to litter, which I think is amazing.
It's really powerful, and it gets me back to this sort of peer conversation that we were having just a couple minutes ago, right? Like, if it's everyone's responsibility, then the visible realization of that, right? Companies are out in their t-shirts, and there's lots of infrastructure around their buildings, trash cans and recycling bins and all of that, and they can see people out there. Citizens see them out there changing those on a daily, weekly, twice a week, whatever basis. Neighbors are on a litter cleanup together, or they're walking their dogs with their litter pickers, and government is cleaning up the trash, and the trash truck comes on time, and there's curbside recycling. All of these things create a virtuous circle where people have a baseline expectation of caring about their communities.
Yes, exactly.
It's fascinating. One of the partnerships that we're working on right now with Niagara is this pilot program called the Love Campaign, which is really sort of spinning the narrative and saying to folks, if you love where you live, and reminding people that they do love where they live and helping them connect to what they love, you'll take care of it, right? And so it that plays into this too, right? Back to everybody has a role to play.
Yeah, you stored things you care about, right? We've been at this for 250 years in this country, right?
Some years better than others, but yes, absolutely. In an era of shrinking attention spans, right, where we're bombarded by media all day long, how can organizations cut through that digital noise and reach people who say they aren't seeing or hearing any litter prevention messages?
Yeah.
They're not being encouraged in the right ways.
Yeah, and I mean, we're so around 2/3 of Americans don't recall seeing any ads, right, for litter prevention. So it is a difficult breakthrough challenge. I think that rather than thinking about the channel I think the key for breakthrough is the message. Right. So my sense is like, yes, this is about litter, but if we stepped back and if we thought about the panacea that the nation needs right now, it's connection. As a nation, we have a ton of data at the Harris Poll that says we are isolated, right? We are lonely. If I believe that the lawn signs we all put on our yards in the month of November, like if mine is different from my neighbors, then I actually am 10% more likely to be isolated and lonely, right? So there's also an intersectionality of this crisis that we're in, of like sort of all the angst that we're dealing with. So when I think about the special sauce here, the special sauce is that like 94% of Americans want to join hands with their neighbors and do good in their communities. Right. And so I say this like we're 30% of Gen Z right now wishes Snapchat never existed. Many Americans are putting restrictions on the amount of technology they use. I mean, if you look at all the new things happening, it's about how it helps us to self-regulate. Like it locks my phone when I've been like, you know, scrolling for too long, et cetera. Right. So we're finding tools to help us find our best selves, tools to help us be more present with ourselves and with each other. And so, you know, even in sort of the work I do with corporate America, we want brands to connect us. We want athleisure stores to close down and become yoga studios at night. We want grocery stores to have upside down pineapple night in lieu of dating apps so we could just stroll around and see who's interested, right? Like, I mean, it's really amazing how this moment is calling organizations. And I would put everybody interested in litter cleanup as well to bring people together, to provide in real life connections. And so again, how do we break through? It might not be with another way of saying litter is bad, right? It might be by saying, knock on your neighbor's door and plan your Saturday morning, right? Have your grab a friend, and rather than a Target run, how about you go to the local school and meet some other neighbors? And we know that, I mean, there's a lot of data that's sort of going into this recommendation, like even the work that we did for you when we said, what's going to be most motivating to make you leave your house on a Saturday morning and want to go pick up. And I mean, it might be drizzling, right? For heaven's sake, right? And the answer is not about like, well, put me on social media and like, whatever. It's about put on a barbecue at the end, right? And let's gather together. Let's split bread, right? So I really feel like there's something really compelling in the messaging, because the moment right now, Americans need non-polarizing reasons to bring us together, right? Things that are human and civic and that are apolitical, and that, beating the drum here again, that is universally seen as an important issue that impacts quality of life, right? So it has real, you can make a real difference. And I think your point about like, how do we capture, the winds at your back, my gosh, compared to 5 years ago, 34% less, like that's a lot. Like go, like, how do you, let's keep that movement going. I think that's the opportunity.
Right. Again, like we've got to figure out, how do you capitalize on such great success when good news is very hard to break through, and it really is. I will say, back to the connection point, the producer will laugh when I say this. So there's a group in Brooklyn called the Pickup Pigeons. They're on Instagram. They're a loose group of friends who organize a cleanup on Friday nights and then go celebrate somebody's birthday or go have a beer or go do movies in the park, right? Like they've integrated this connection, this civic moment to people feel good, because the big secret about picking up litter, people are like, oh, I don't want to pick up litter. If you go do it some Saturday, it's a lot of fun, right? Like
Exactly.
fun, and you meet neighbors and you pick up weird things and you have good conversations. Like it's actually really fun. And so the pickup pigeons have capitalized on this to bring their neighbors who they don't all know, it's such a transient place, together. And I just admire the heck out of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I love that.
So civic pride is the conversation of the moment. We are now, less than 10 days away from the country's 250th birthday. It's a big talking point. Did you notice that sentiment or desire for community unity playing a role in this research?
I mean, I think I noticed that when 84% of people agree on anything, that this has the potential to be community unifying,
Yeah.
right? And that's pretty much the levels that we get of willingness to participate. And it's not just participate to, again, to improve like beautification, but to participate with others for that connection. I also think that there is just broadly from the other data that we see, there's interest in across America and like just de-escalating how divided we are. Right. Let's
Yeah.
have a morning where we don't talk about it, where we have fun and don't talk about it. And if it ends with a nice barbecue, all the better for it. We know that younger Americans, like more than 7 and 10, want to be part of a cultural moment. Right? They want to have these types of experiences. 80% of Gen Z says it's a goal of mine this year to interact with more people in the real world. I mean, first of all, A, that's sad, right? But B, that's like noteworthy. And so, we see pride, civic pride right now. It came through in this research mostly in the form of like how non-polarizing this was, how much agreement there was that this was a human issue and a civic issue. But you look at the moment right now, yes, with the 250th, but yet also you see the World Cup. We are hosting the world right now, and it's not going bad, right? There's nothing embarrassing happening, right? So the idea that you know, I would say that this is a moment of pride for the nation, right? Even if you don't agree with who's ever in the White House at the moment, right? This is a moment of pride for the nation. And um, so this desire for community unity, and I think basically it's the same thing. How do you capitalize on this moment, right? And that becomes the challenge because you know that culturally, like societally, people want to be with each other. They want to find reasons, and sometimes it's hard, right? We're using tools to help us not be so tech focused, right? We want to find reasons where it's easy for us to look up and out, so to say, and do good together and
Yeah.
to engage. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, right? The Scots and the Japanese fans.
Yes.
I just,
Lawson running out of beer. I mean, how great is
oh,
that?
it's so wonderful. Yeah, I have
Yeah.
a friend who used to work at Boston Beer there, and I was like, "How on earth did you run out of beer?" She said in 5 locations. But just I think the joy that the Scots have brought to all of us, I think it's a good reminder that as a nation we used to have a lot more fun than we've been having lately, and that there is a way to be kind and civically focused and even pick up litter and still have it be a whole heck of a lot of fun.
That's exactly right.
So to wrap things up, Wendy, and this has been great. I think I always leave thinking, oh, I could just pick Wendy's brain forever. What is the single most important thought or insight? Like, what's that thing you want our listeners to take away from our conversation today?
I think it's in the gap between the two, studies that you did. This idea that Americans don't feel like as a body of work, we see that there is progress, but Americans don't see it when it comes to litter. And that just feels really noteworthy. So we are at a moment where there is good news to tell, right? We're at a point of time where, by the way, um, that would be a welcome change, right? And this is about a topic that materially matters. And so I think it's the crux of this like untapped well of positive news, right? How do we unleash that, right? And against the backdrop of the 250th and the World Cup, and how can you take these good vibes and motivate Americans maybe to offset their loneliness, right? By gathering in communities to drive cleanup. So it's the idea of this untapped well, I think, of positive news that to me is the most important action item, so to say, right? Like how do we keep that going?
Now you've given
Mhm.
me something to think about all weekend, all through the July 4th America
Yes,
250 holiday.
celebration.
Right? Like, I'm really going to take this moment as a starting point and not an ending point, right? Like, we're going to reconnect to some core American values here. We're reconnecting through the FIFA experience and how great the fans have been in all the different cities. Let's reconnect to like all
Yeah.
the things that are great and to bring that message forward. I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
So, Wendy Salomon, always an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was great.
What stood out to me most today is this struggle that we're having between wanting a cleaner country and delivering on that for ourselves and our neighbors, right? Closing the gap isn't something anyone can do alone. what we heard today is it takes all of us, and that isn't a bad thing. It's actually a great thing. It's a way to reconnect with our neighbors, with each other. Who knows? You might even meet a personal new friend or partner. So I want us to take a minute and look at the incredible energy we've seen around America's 250th and the World Cup. It proved that there's an undeniable hunger out there for connection, for shared purpose. And now the real challenge is channeling that pride into lasting, everyday momentum. The 2026 National Litter Study isn't just a collection of data. It's a tactical roadmap for how we carry that spirit forward. Look out for one another and build more beautiful environments from the ground up. To dive into the data and to learn more about the 2026 National Litter Study, visit kab.org. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, take care, stay inspired, and keep doing beautiful things. See you in the next episode.